Hi, everybody. So I'm Paul Kovacs, and I'm the founder of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. We're at Western University. We're specialists in climate impact and how to prevent the damage that's been occurring from climate change. I want to talk about what all this means for Lytton. Quick show of hands of the people who are still here. So if you reflect in your opinion on the direct damage to buildings and infrastructure in Canada from climate events. In the last few years, are we having more damage than we had 20, 25 years ago, or about the same? How many think it's the same? We're not really a change. And how many think there's more damage? So I've got everybody with their hands up. Same question, but looking ahead. So the damage the last few years. If you compare the damage the last few years, in your opinion, to the damage that you think will likely happen if we don't change what we're doing in the next 20 or 25 years, do you think the damage will be the same 20, 25 years from now? Or do you think the damage will go up? So I've been talking to a lot of audiences around the world. There's a really strong sense things have led to more damage from climate extremes. There's a real strong consensus if we don't change, there's more coming. The data for Canada shows that the damage over the last 20 or 25 years has increased 8-fold. That means it doubled, and it doubled the second time, and it doubled a third time in the last 25 years. And the data from the last few years shows that trend hasn't stopped. So looking ahead, it looks like it's going to double and double again and double again in the next 20 or 25 years. The part that is really challenging for a number of us is we know how to stop that. We know how to build resilient. We're just not doing it yet. There's a strategy that has been shared for British Columbia about what climate resilience looks like. There's a strategy that the UN has put in place, a strategy that Canada has bought into. The data shows that it's a good plan. But we're into year 7 actually of trying to implement the Sendai framework for disaster reduction. And the direct damage has not slowed down at all because we haven't made the investments. We haven't made the changes that we talked about doing. And until we really start making the changes in Lytton, start making the changes provincially and nationally, then the trend that we're experiencing is going the wrong way in an alarming way. Doubling and doubling and doubling. Alarming trend that we know how to stop and we can change. For me, for 20 years, I was a volunteer representing Canada on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is the leading forum worldwide studying climate change. Our work, we won a Nobel Prize for the work we're doing because of the analysis about climate change. So I'd be pleased to answer any questions you might still have about what's happening to the climate and why we've got to this situation and what's coming next. But I was part of the team focusing on the impacts. I heard lots of other important things shared with you today, but my specialty is what does this all mean to your home, to your infrastructure. And the team I've set up at our university, we're the leading climate center in Canada. We work with the BC Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Preparedness. I was chair of the Ontario Committee on Climate Change Adaptation, and I've worked with the UN and the Canadian government. We know how to build properly. So what does that mean for communities like Lytton? Shortly before the fire, we completed a multi-year project where all of the wildfire experts in Canada came together to document the best practices for new construction to reduce the risk that a fire in the wildland became damage to buildings and infrastructure. So that's the NRC guide. It's done by the National Building Code people. Every builder out there in the other room that I talked to have all read it. They all know what the best practices guide looks like. The issue in Canada is a guide. It's not a building code. British Columbia can make it a building code, but they haven't. We would like to see there to be a wildfire building code in British Columbia. We'd like to see a building code in Alberta and elsewhere in Canada, but we don't have a building code for wildfire in Canada. But we do have a guide. It's relatively new. It's only a couple years old, but we have a guide. And the builders have read it. to rebuild Lytton. Lytton is the first community that worked with us and others to write a bylaw. The wildfire bylaw in Canada says rebuild following the NRC guide. Lytton's the first community in the world to say, let's use the best science to rebuild the community, do it right. There are a lot of very progressive communities in British Columbia and Alberta who have building bylaws for wildfire. It's not based on the newest guide. Lytton is the first to pass a bylaw to do that. And when we analyzed it and shared it with a number of advisor groups here in Lytton, we found that the extra cost to build with wildfire resilient for a typical home in Lytton is $5,000 more than the cost of building without wildfire protection. $5,000 means different things to different people, but the number is $5,000 for a typical home in Lytton. What are we proposing that's different? We were not looking for brand new, out of the wherever it came from, ways of building a home. What a wildfire resilient home looks like is the home that was there before, but the siding needs to be different. Most of the problems in Lytton were the siding. If you have wood siding, if you have vinyl siding, that's not a good thing if you're in an area that has wildfires. I have hardy board. Use a fire resilient siding. In Lytton, that's a bylaw, that's a requirement in Lytton. And when you rebuild, the house will look the same, it's just got different siding on it. Another risk that is on some of the homes in Lytton, it's great to have a deck. It's nice to sit outside sometimes on your deck, but build a deck that's fire resilient. If you put a wood deck out the side of the house, then that can be a problem. Build so that the deck is fire resilient. Build outbuildings, like if you have a shed or something, build it so it's fire resilient. There was a study done right after the fire by BC Forest Service, conducted by Jack Cohen and Alan Westhaver, who were out and about sharing the story. That's a long story. I'm giving you a few seconds of a long story here. Why did this fire destroy Lytton? It was a grass fire, followed several paths through the community. We've had grass fires before, we'll have grass fires again. The fire burned right by a lot of things. I mean, the trees are all still there and whatever. It was a grass fire. It was a nasty grass fire. It was terrible. It was so hot and dry, but the fire burned by. But some of the buildings ignited. One here, one there, one there. Sort of different buildings, different parts of town, and they weren't put out. There were just too many all happening quickly. I mean, so the problem in Lytton was the grass fire ignited the buildings. Some were sheds, some were houses, but the grass fire ignited the building. Let's build so houses don't ignite if a grass fire comes. Have some space between the grass and the building. Have siding that doesn't ignite. And again, this is not innovative, untested technology. This is changing small changes. Where's all this written down? This is written down in the NRC guide. The people who worked together on the NRC guide, that was FireSmart, that was the Canadian Home Builders, that was our institute. I mean, these are not, somebody with a brand new thing that we haven't tested. These are all folks who have been around for a little while, sat together and said, what do we know about living in communities where there is fire risk today, and it's going to get worse with climate change. So we know what to do. We need to get on with it. I'm excited that Lytton passed a bylaw saying everybody will do this. This is the right way to go. I look forward to when the rebuilding gets going. I am finding that there are still a lot of challenges where federal government comes and say we are going to provide $77 million to support fire resilience and other things, the pilot study in Lytton. But I was in the village and I saw the first thing to go up, which got some people excited, but I was disappointed. There is power in Lytton. And I saw the power towers of power. I mean, those could have been buried. That's what a resilient community does. My community in Ontario, we bury all the power lines. We've been doing it for 25 years. I happened to sit in on the council meeting where BC Hydro said, we're going to give you back power and we'll pay for the cost and put the towers back in. But if you want them buried, that costs more money and somebody's got to pay the extra cost and you have to tell us. you're going to do it and pay the extra cost. So I'm looking at Lytton and I see the towers are back. So we've got power in Lytton, we can get on with things, but we didn't do the extra step that could have been done. There's one that I was watching for. So I hope we're going to do the other extra steps. I hope we will not see homes rebuilt in Lytton with wood siding and with vinyl siding. That's what the bylaw says, and I hope that's what we're going to see all across the community. I hope we won't see wood decks that aren't somehow protected from wildfire. There will be grass burned through the community again, so I hope people learn to plant around their homes, leave space next to the house. I'm a huge fan of Fire Smart BC. I think they do an amazing job. I hope everybody in the community embraces it. On my way here, I stopped in at Logan Lake and talked to the fire chief. There's a community that takes this stuff really seriously. They're doing amazing things. And they were having a community day at the fire hall where all the kids were coming and everybody just chatting about fire protection. They have the fire chief pulled out his binder listing everybody in the community who'd had an assessment. Here's my risk for my house, and I want the fire chief to have a copy. And they take fire protection really seriously in that community. Not everybody, but we've come a long way. It's a community that's been working down this path for, I think, 20 years. And they still have a lot to do. And so the communities that are the furthest along have more to do, and they start with that conversation about what they want to do next and how they get the rest of the community on side. Lytton, we have an opportunity to turn the devastation into a really wonderful outcome of a much improved, resilient community. Our group from the university for 18 months now has been trying to work with council and with staff and anybody who wants our free advice and suggestions about what wildfire resilience can look like. We found that the system, defined kind of loosely, has a lot of well-meaning people, but it's hard to move and hard to get some things done. One of the pieces that we thought was important was Lytton had a community wildfire protection plan. But that plan was written before the town burned, and it wasn't quite relevant. It didn't really describe what was needed at this point in time for this community. And while the province funds communities like Lytton to get updated community wildfire protection plans, the sense was Lytton was going to be on the list, and maybe in a year or two they would get a new plan. So anyway, we just gave money to the village from the university funds. So I lost a couple students this summer, but anyway, we gave money to the community, and they hired Bruce Blackwell, and he's put together a new community wildfire and recovery plan for Lytton, and it looks pretty good. And it says, here's what we need to do next, and this is the community's plan of what the community needs to do to be ready. So Lytton has a plan. Many communities have plans. The big challenge is to implement the plan. So there is a program by the Union of BC Municipalities to implement community wildfire protection plans. And I apologize for not knowing all the names for these things, but there's a well-meaning program funded by the province through the Union of BC Municipalities. And again, you get in line and you wait a year or two and you get some funding. But you have to fill out all the forms and do it properly, and there's so many people doing so many things in Lytton, so we did it for them. And we took the time and we got the form and we filled it all in and then turned it over to staff and to council, and it's the community asking for the money. So they edited it and fixed it and whatever they needed to do, and they've sent it on in. So, we're hoping that'll be $300,000 into the community so that we can implement the plan that's now here for the community. But we've got a system. The system is here to help. It moves slowly. It's got a lot of good elements. For those of us who come from afar and to say what's happening in British Columbia, most of the elements in British Columbia are the best in Canada. They can be made better, but we're watching the trouble in Alberta and elsewhere. There's some other parts of the country that are far worse off in terms of thinking about wildfire and actually doing something. But here in British Columbia, there are ways that could be better. watching the conversation where the federal minister came in and promised millions of dollars to build back Lytton and pay the marginal cost to do things better. For me, I would love to see these homeowners say, I had wood siding or vinyl siding and I've now put on hardy board and the extra cost was whatever it was. Would Pacific Can pay this amount? Here's all the paperwork. Sounded pretty simple to me. Anyway, that conversation, I understand, is still coming along. Whatever the federal government's going to do is not yet clear and not decided. I look forward to learning more about what will be coming with that program. Didn't sound very complicated to me as we were putting it together. You've heard me not talk about net zero because I don't know about net zero. I'm a climate change person. I know about resilience. Net zero is a really exciting opportunity. I know net zero wasn't really talked about in British Columbia. It was a step code and step 3 versus step 5 and all of that. And suddenly this net zero has come into the conversation. So anyway, it made it even more complicated for those of us who don't understand the conversation. And how do you do that extra element that has been promised? I hope that doesn't mean slowing things down, because I do know to put back Lytton and have wildfire resilient is really simple. We've been to all the local hardware stores and whatever, all the parts and materials are available, all the workers who do this stuff, you know how to put on hardy board siding instead of vinyl siding. All of the basics to do the wildfire stuff is straightforward. It doesn't slow things down at all, and you can have a wildfire resilient community. The energy efficiency conversation is an interesting one, and I look forward to learning more as I'm watching how that one goes. And I hope that keeps the process moving. It needs to be done. Let's get on with it. And it's not expensive. It's simple. It's all doable. We just need to start building. We need to get on with this process. Closing from me, our group at the university, we focus on the impact of climate extremes, and we focus on how to build more safely. Many years ago, we've been doing this for more than 25 years now. Many years ago, we attracted support from the insurance industry. They really want to know what's happening, and they really want to know how to do this right, and they really want to know what's a good building, what's not a good building. So talking with the insurance companies, again, this is a no-brainer. Of course you build back and you don't put on the vinyl siding and the wood siding, you put on the fire resilient siding, and of course you make these changes for resilience. I think that the conversation happening in Lytton to bring this to the next step, to put the community back, for those with insurance is all straightforward. You've got guidance from the community, here's what's expected. You have insurance companies ready to move on resilience. The wildfire resilient conversation is ready to go. Will all happen very, very quickly. There are a lot of other conversations happening in Lytton as well at the same time on many other topics, and I don't understand all of those, and so I'm not going to try to offer comments about how to work through those elements. But the wildfire part is clear. I think the community, I think the village knows what it wants to do. I think the science is clear. Those with funding, I hope Pacific can, as I try to figure out what they're doing with the federal money. Certainly when we've talked to the insurance companies on wildfire resilience, they're all on side and they just want to do this. So I see a lot of positives in Lytton. And I want to close by saying I'm looking forward to making Lytton into the model that's taken across the province. I would love to see a BC wildfire protection code. If BC isn't ready to go yet, there's a number of communities that we're going to go talk to in Kelowna and Kamloops and wherever, and try to say, here's the NRC guide. Lytton was the first to put it in place as a bylaw. Why don't you do the same guide? And why don't you bring those same things for your community, because they're the right things for wildfire safety, for wildfire protection. You should not have wood siding anymore on new construction. You should not have vinyl siding on new construction. You should have wildfire resilience on all development permit applications. So with that, if I can close, just my little bit to add to the conversation today about climate change and what I think it means for Lytton. So thank you for the opportunity, and hopefully this time later to talk and have some questions. Thank you.